Katie, something I'd love to dig into a little more, just because you're an individual that pushes this to the extreme, is kind of the human body's ability to adapt. And kind of it's interesting because like the word overtraining gets thrown out a lot, and of course I think given wherever you're at on the training spectrum, burying yourself into the ground certainly is not the answer. But you, and I know you do a lot of coaching, it's like, how do you go about kind of scaling people and getting them to see potentially that, guys, you have so much more potential and so much more capacity than you could ever imagine. That doesn't mean you're going to do it tomorrow, but like, let's develop a program and some systems to maybe get you there in the next 2 or 3 years. And of course, for each individual, that looks different. But how do you kind of approach that as somebody who's expanded your bandwidth so far, when you're maybe working with somebody that even getting in the gym 2 to 3 times a week is challenging?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was, being a full-time trainer and coach at places like Google or Oracle, like corporate health and wellness, you have a lot of that. So you have people who have never even walked into a gym, people who have never done a squat before. And those are my favorite people to work with and train. There's not a lot of ego. I've worked at CrossFit, helping people set PRs and things like that. But it's my passion to help people get into fitness and start their journey. And a lot of like showing them their potential is, building that confidence that they can do it. So I think that's always step number one is building the internal confidence and the mindset that you can do this, and then you can do greater things, and you can keep just progressing higher and higher. But it definitely starts with like being confident in themselves, that they can achieve more than they think.
Yeah, and it feels like to me, even just at the gym this morning, sometimes I shake my head, and I'm not judging them, but some trainers, it makes you scratch your head when you see individuals like yourself that are at a very high level of fitness. You know how to scale things in a way that's reasonable and create a program so that that individual that maybe has never been into a gym, you're not going to have them back squatting on week one. It's like, hey, let's at least get you moving a little bit, get you to recognize what it's like to have your heart rate elevated. But Bear and I go to the same gym in the morning, and it's a nice gym, but it's not like a private little gym. There's a ton of people there, and I will see all the time just individuals that can't even move, and the trainer has them doing, like I said, back squats or deadlifts in their form. It's like I'm happy that they're in there, but they're going to be so discouraged when they feel how their body feels after that one session, as opposed to like, hey, maybe do some sled work for the first just month, just getting them to learn how to use their lower half. Is that something you recognize at times within the fitness space as well?
Oh, for sure. I've seen, all of
spectrum.
That plus more.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely have to meet people where they're at and then go from there and then point them to the next thing that they need to do. But yeah, you have to start at a very elementary level, and to get them excited about fitness, to want them to come back. Otherwise, yeah, they're going to be super discouraged. They're not going to, want to try. So yeah, that's definitely the first step.
Well, and think about that poor lady that just did back squats for the first time in 20 years.
I've almost
She's not going to be able to walk down the steps for 4 days. I mean, anyone, I don't care who you are, if you haven't squatted in 10 years,
it's bad.
You put 135 on for us, and you 5 sets of 10, you're not walking for 3 days.
No.
So that poor lady now thinks this is normal, right? Oh, this is just all these maniacs. They just walk around this store all the time. And you're like, it's never going to be like that ever. You know what I mean? So it does, I totally agree with you. And you don't want to set up an environment that people want to get into the gym and get after it. It's not this big scary thing. But that surely probably does not help the cause when day one we're hitting back squats 5 by 10.
It's so normal too.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah. Damn. So you recently got into the tactile games. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so it's always been something I wanted to try. And then I finally just like jumped in and did it. So I was back home in Iowa last summer for a couple weeks. And there was tactical games happening probably like an hour from where my family lives. And at that point I didn't have any of my own gear, any of my, like it's handgun and rifle. And so I didn't have either of those. But both my brothers are in the military. And so I borrowed all their gear. So we just drove out there. Not a lot of experience with shooting targets. And so that was different, especially with the elevated heart rate. But I had so much fun. And so then I was pretty hooked. And then I did the team event, I think a month or two later. So the fitness aspect of that event went really well. Like my scores were like the top 1, 2, and then you'd get your shooting cards back, and I'd be like, oh, and drop to the bottom. And so like I would realize I had a lot of work to put in. So my dad has a farm out there, so my brother and I just practiced every day doing like our own drills, running and then shooting, and body weight movements, stuff like that. But it's a lot of fun. It's a cool event. They run it super well, super safe. I was impressed.
And is that something you're going to add to your arsenal? Like, are you going to lean harder into that, or will it be kind of more of a do it for fun?
I have quite a few on my race schedule for 2024. I'm going to need to put in a lot of work and time. You do get red dots on your handgun now, which is different. So it was iron sights.
Okay.
So that made it tricky. But now I'm definitely going to lean a little harder into it, just because I had so much fun and it went pretty well. So it's a challenge that I definitely want to take on this next year.
And I know you said you had brothers growing up and they're in the military now. So I'm sure, did you grow up shooting guns at all? Was hunting a part of, like, were you at all comfortable with a handgun or a rifle, or was that something just completely brand new?
Yeah, growing up in Iowa, that's kind of like the norm. I mean, all my family like hunted white-tailed deer in Iowa. So I was comfortable, but when you put that with fitness and running around and lifting heavy things, it's nothing that I've ever done before. So that was new, but I was definitely comfortable with the whole premise of it.
And I'm assuming, I don't know a ton about the tactical games. I'm assuming it's probably better to approach it the way with your skill set, where you're extremely fit and learning to shoot rather than really good at shooting and trying to get the fitness part. Would that be a correct assumption?
Well, like physically it's probably easier. So like I wasn't dying, right? But some of the people who win the tactical games all the time, not all of them, but a lot of them, they are just sharpshooters. They're so good at shooting. And so their fitness might not be, near the level of some of the other competitors, but they can shoot. So that really helps them. But getting started into it, I would say like having a pretty good endurance fitness background helps you survive the events.
And with everything you've kind of with even now the tactical games and then the Go Ruck and the Spartan races, something we've talked a lot. We had a episode, Winning in the Gym. We just kind of talked through our background as athletes, him in the military, of just like what training modalities and programs like we feel like can give you the most bang for your buck in different phases of life, whatever you're trying to achieve. With you having been exposed to so many different modalities, is there one, and I know right now it seems like running is really a focus. I know you said you were in CrossFit, that kind of you would say has the best trickle down to just being overall as fit as possible? And I know this is a loaded question. There's not one right answer, but what modalities that you've exposed yourself to would you say kind of have the most bang for your buck as far as being an overall like aerobic athlete, strength and anaerobic?
Yeah, I mean, I would say running and my capacity and volume in that area, and also like biking really helps me in things like the gym, where if I'm only lifting weights and then I go try to run, that doesn't help me as much. So in all the events and competitions I do, if my aerobic capacity is very high, I will do pretty well. But I would say running has helped a ton, and then strength training too. So there's a lot of runners out there, and even in Spartan races and obstacle course racing, that don't have the strength and the muscle endurance, and that's kind of their hindrance. And so having my start more so be in weightlifting and strength training like CrossFit, that has kind of helped a ton, where just running alone probably wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I was gonna politely push back until you said that, because a lot of people, all they do is run. And again, if it's better than nothing. Like if you're gonna do it, of course. But as far as like a well-rounded, individual, even with appearance, I hate to say it, like if you only run, you're gonna have a very specific physique that will look a lot different than someone that runs and then goes hits weights a few days a week. Like that'll be a completely different look. Guy or girl, doesn't matter. But the fact that you've, of course, blended both. Now, it gets tricky with the ultras, because obviously muscle is heavy, right? And it uses up a lot of oxygen. So I'm sure you've had to find that balance You know, especially like with the guys, some of these guys are running, they're like 130 pounds and I'm 240. So like, I'm never going to keep up with those guys in a foot race. Right. So, right. But at some point, if we got to move a boulder at that, you know, Tough Mudder or whatever, you know, they might be sitting there for 2 hours. And then finally the tortoise is going to come up out of the rear. Yeah. Right. So I guess
exactly.
I guess it depends on the event, but it sounds like you've been able to find that balance of, not doing too much strength, you know, work where you've, you know, kind of bulked up and then it's using a bunch of oxygen and it's heavy. But you've been able to have enough strength to kind of have a competitive advantage against those people that are just, all they do is just run hundreds of miles and they never put in the weights.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still way bigger than most ultra marathoners or runners. I show up to, you know, start lines and I've been told 1,000 times, like, you don't run ultras. Or like, you run ultras, like it's always a question because of how I look, that I have muscle. But yeah, I'll take muscle any day. It is a little more tricky when it comes to like 24-hour races because I'm going to need to fuel a lot more because runners who don't have muscle, they don't need to feed anything. And so they're not feeding their muscles to keep going so they can get away with, you know, eating applesauce and baby food where like I really have to eat like Uncrustables and pizza and things like that to keep me going and keep me fueled. But yeah, I make sure all my clients, no matter if they're just, you know, training for a 5K or running, that they do strength training and they lift weights because it's very important.